college for Seattle students at great universities like this. This week, students here can walk over the new John Lewis Memorial Bridge to the new Kraken Starbucks Iceplex, or take a train from the new light rail station to a great job downtown, to the Climate Pledge Arena, or to our transforming waterfront park. Tonight, I want to share the two key priorities in my final budget that keeps us moving forward together. First, continuing the fight against COVID-19 and ensuring we recover stronger and better than before. This demands that we make generational investments in equity so that Seattle truly can be a city for everyone. Second, making unprecedented investments to address other crises that we faced before the pandemic: homelessness, housing, public safety, and climate change. None of us imagined how long we'd be fighting this virus. 19 months, and we're still not done. COVID-19 has been hard for every person, every family, and every community. But at every turn, Seattle, you stepped up. We've done so much to fight COVID and help each other. Our actions have saved thousands of lives, from healthcare workers to first responders to frontline workers to teachers and childcare providers to small business owners. Thank you. In February, I set a goal to be the first city to have 70% of our residents fully vaccinated. Together, we beat that goal. Because of our actions, we have the lowest cases, hospitalizations, and mortality rates of any major American city. But the virus is tough, and we have to keep at it. That's why I announced a plan today to provide boosters to eligible individuals and vaccinate our youngest kids as soon as the vaccine is approved for them. We will keep Seattle safe and move our economy forward. We'll get federal recovery funds where they're needed. We'll continue supporting small businesses who are still struggling. We'll invest in childcare, pre-K, and expand the Seattle Promise. We'll use this crisis to close disparities, not let the gaps get worse. We will keep making significant community-led investments to address long-standing racial inequities. To truly succeed, Seattle, we must respond to the crises and look to the future, and that's what this budget does. Over the last 4 years, I focused much of my energy and action on our homelessness and housing crisis. It was a generation in the making. All of us, including me, are frustrated. It feels like any progress we made on homelessness was erased by the pandemic. With thousands of unsheltered individuals in our streets and parks, a shortage of housing, and not enough treatment services, there's no easy solutions. But with steady regional, state, and federal action, there is real hope. Over the last year, we started building 1,300 new homes for people experiencing homelessness. We're finally moving to a regional approach to this regional crisis. This fall, we'll open another 375 24/7 shelter spaces. That means we'll have 3,000 shelter spaces next year to move more people off the streets into safer spaces while removing the most dangerous encampments. And in this budget, we will nearly double our investments in more affordable housing to $200 million. We'll also continue to address public safety challenges. Like many of you, I believe it's a false choice to say we must choose between investing in effective community alternatives or investing in having enough well-trained police officers. We need both. This budget ensures we have enough police officers and alternatives to police interventions, particularly for people in crisis. Like Health One, a program I launched before the pandemic that sends medics and social workers instead of police to certain 911 calls. My budget also adds 125 new officers and $1 million for officer hiring incentives and new resources for training and oversight. I hope the City Council joins me to support this approach for true community safety and not buy into false choices. Seattle, we still face some serious challenges, But we've shown we can do big things if we work together. When the story of this pandemic is told, Seattle, we will be remembered as the city that led the nation and got it right because of our innovation, compassion, and determination, because we care for each other and the city that we love. Together, we won't just make it through, we'll come back stronger, better, and more just. Please stay safe, get vaccinated, and take care of each other. Good evening.
All right, Kevin.
Here we go.
We'll see what the mayor is doing over here. I think that's ended their broadcast. So, kind of brief there. And it looks like they're done over there. So it's a lot of whatever. It's always well produced. 2 years in a row.
That's right.
So,
It was short. She was short and to the point tonight. That was like 7 minutes.
Definitely to the point. What are some of the big takeaways? I know one of the main things the mayor talked about early on and kind of let out early is that its focuses are COVID and homelessness.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. She said there's two big priorities. One is COVID, and the other is 5 other priorities, right? Homelessness, housing, public safety, a couple of other things in there. Probably getting the West Seattle Bridge, finally fixed. Right. All that. So, but I spent a good amount today going through the details of her budget, and she's really backing a lot of that up. Right. So there's a lot of money in this budget for housing. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Office of Housing is seeing about $114 million added to its budget this year. 89 million of that's going to go straight into building more housing. Another 15, almost 16 million of that is going to go into acquiring housing in neighborhoods that are really facing high displacement, and another 6 million, of course, if she gets her way on all this, on expanding home acquisition, home ownership. And so help really start to address some of the issues around generational wealth with that. So that's a big deal. Human services, which is where the city's homelessness investment has lived for a very long time, is also going to see a pretty big change this year, because rather than running, $114 million of homelessness investments themselves, they're going to write a check for $104 million to the regional homeless authority.
They're giving $104 million to the county.
Right, not to King County itself, but to this new regional homeless authority that King County and City of Seattle sort of started up together.
So what's the city still going to support though?
A couple things. They're going to keep a couple $1 million in the budget to keep running the HOPE team. So that's not moving over to the homeless authority. Most of their contracts that they have right now with service providers are going to move over to the new regional homeless authority to manage. But they're going to keep about $8.5 million for a couple contracts. And they don't really say in the budget exactly which ones those are, but you can imagine it may have something to do very specifically with some particular facilities that the city has. So those are certainly very, very big priorities for the mayor. It certainly looks like she's decided in what we hear often as a regular talking point for progressives in the city, that the solution to homelessness is housing. And on top of that, we do have a housing crisis even beyond the homelessness crisis, where housing, pre-pandemic was too expensive in the city for many people. A lot of people were priced out. And
still too expensive.
Well, it went down like 22% last year, but now we're back up to basically where we were in early 2000, right? So we've gone full circle over the last year and a half on rent prices. We're back to where we were when we were complaining that it was too expensive. So building more housing, more affordable housing, permanently affordable housing, helping to make sure that when there are apartment complexes that open up, there's an opportunity to buy them, right, and keep them as what they tend to call naturally affordable housing, kind of older housing that kind of is a little lower rent than new housing. So some good opportunities there.
Yeah. And what I see here, I mean, you told me that was a big bump with where the city so far, what she's saying is putting the money where their mouth is. 104 million.
104 million is going to Regional Housing Authority, Homeless Authority. The Office of Housing, their budget is going to increase by 114 million. So it's going to be
114 million dollar increase into the
increase. Yeah.
Wow.
And again, 89 million of that is going straight into building more affordable housing.
Into more housing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Public safety and investments.
Yeah, public safety. There's a couple parts of this. One is, of course, the one we pay attention to most, which is the police department's budget. And the police department's budget is almost exactly the same as last year. So it's 365 million. That's about 3 million more than 2021. And really, I talked to the city budget director about this. Not a whole lot is really changing in that budget this year. They've moved out the 911 call center into the new community safety and communication center. They've had to do some cost of living adjustments like they do every year. But beyond that, it's really pretty much the same. When you dive into the details, you see that something that Chief Diaz, SPD Chief Diaz, started last year is still sort of a priority, which is to put as much resources as they can to sustaining patrol operations. And they've cut back significantly last year and this year on investigations. And that can be a bit concerning. Right? There's a lot of investment that we'd like to have investigations to make sure we can follow up on domestic violence, on other drug crimes, things like that, so we can make sure that we're tracking down drug dealers and getting drugs off the street, so that we're dealing with family and domestic violence issues, right? So and right now it's a pretty significant cut to the budget for the investigation side, but it looks like they're doing pretty good, at least on paper, in the money side of maintaining patrol operations. What the city budget office told me is they expect next year, between their projections for attrition and the number of new officers they have in the pipeline, they're hoping to have a net increase of about 35 officers next year.
So a total of 35 new.
35 more.
Yeah, 35 right. More.
So hiring minus attrition, they think it's going to be a net plus 35.
Really?
Yep. That doesn't sound very much. Yeah, it's still way below where we were a couple of years ago. And there's certainly people in the town who think that's a good thing. Right. People in this town who think that's not such a good thing. But that's what the numbers on paper look like right now. And of course, the other side of this is that there have been these really big investments in things like the Equitable Communities Initiative and participatory budgeting. And what the mayor's office is saying on that is that she expects both, from looking at the recommendations of the Equitable Communities Initiative, easy for me to say apparently, has recommended, and what they expect to see as recommendations from participatory budgeting, that a lot of those recommendations aren't going to be one-time expense. They're going to be ongoing. So what they hope to do with that, or what they're hoping to do in this budget, is find the ongoing revenue resources so that they can continue to fund those, not just in 2022, but beyond that, right? So, and they're taking action. The easy thing they could do with participatory budgeting, because this year only like 3 million of the $30 million they set aside is actually getting spent. They can say, yeah, we'll just roll over the 27 million, add another 3 million, and we got next year covered. But what they're doing instead is they're saying new revenue source that we can depend upon for 2023 and beyond, and we're going to start it next year. So in 2022, they're actually going to have $57 million for the participatory budgeting program.
So then has the mayor, at least in this budget as proposed, has the mayor kept her promise, at least in this budget, about where she said a few times, and actually she announced on the morning show some months ago that she intended to put another 100 million into this budget and find a way to find some source to keep it going for years to come.
Well, certainly on the second part, it definitely looks like they're trying to do that. I've got more paper,
Right,
more work to do
right.
digging through this, but at this point, they're definitely putting, money in the bucket. And just to finish up on the participatory budgeting part of this, so they'll have 57 million this year. 30 million of which, if it continues on with the mayor's proposal, will be continued on in 2023 and beyond. So what the mayor's office is saying is that the city council could decide, and she's apparently giving the city council some room to kind of make some decisions here. They could spend 27 million on one-time investments from participatory budgeting, and then go fund $30 million of programs that can live on for future years and really be sustained, as well as ongoing programs in the community. So there's a bunch of flexibility there. And then the Equitable Communities Initiative, same sort of thing. They're finding an ongoing, sustained source of funding, so it doesn't have to be a one and done thing with that.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people watching that.
Yep.
Amongst so many other issues here. Somebody brought something up here in the comments though, and this kind of plays into something that occurred today or this morning. People saw me on Twitter. We were talking about this, shots fired over at Junkins Park and all these different things here. You're saying that investigations budget was cut. It's lower back to SPD.
It was really cut in 2021, right? And
to be able to put resources in patrol.
Right. Chief Dan has said, and I know he said this to you too, is his priority has been keeping the 911 response time low within their goals. And so he's had to pull people, he says, off of other divisions within SPD to supplement the patrol division.
I see.
Right.
All right.
And that's left investigations shorthand.
Next, we got here investing in small business, workforce development, education.
Yeah, that's coming from, it looks like it's coming from a couple different places. There's some of the Equitable Communities Initiative money that was recommended for that. There's some funding in the payroll tax that was earmarked for that as well. And it looks like that money is going to kind of flow on through to that, which I think will be hopeful, a very helpful thing. There's a big bump in the Office of Economic Development's budget this year, which is where a lot of that. Let's see. Well, let me just look up Office of Economic Development. I got my little eye chart here of all the budgets. Where's Economic Development? Well, you talk for a second.
No, I have stuff to say here.
Economic Development is, they're going from. They're adding about $8 million. They're going from $21 million last year or this year to $29 million. So they're putting almost 40% increase in their budget going into 2022. And a lot of that is these kinds of programs to invest in, a lot of it around small businesses, around small business ownership and supporting small business owners. Right? Mm-hmm. Some of that is going to come out of the ARPA funding, the federal ARPA funding, the second tranche, what they're expected.
Yeah, ARPA funding is crazy though. That's a whole nother conversation, because it's different when the city, maybe the county has some funds for you, but the minute it's the taxpayers of the United States, my friend, the dollars aren't always easy to access. I'm glad they're there though.
Yeah. Well, so I can tell you how they're getting $116 million, and what the mayor's budget says is $50 million is going to go to affordable housing. That's a big chunk of that increase for the Office of Housing. About $25 million for homeless response. $14.5 million is the kind of economic programs we were talking about: economic inclusion, workforce development, small business ownership. $6.7 million is going to go to Seattle Promise program, the college tuition program. So that's a great thing. $6.5 million to what the city calls its Clean City Initiative, to clean up some of the to provide some response for the homeless encampments that get abandoned around the city and leave a lot of garbage and junk around. $4 million is going to go into IT investments for the city of Seattle itself, so they can better support city employees working from home and hybrid work environment for the folks who need that. So, that's most of the money that's going into that.
This is the slide up is the ARPA tranche 2, 116 million.
Yeah.
Then you were just explaining there.
Yeah.
$6.7 million, the Seattle Promise Program. That's something that we know about fairly well over here at Converge, covering that. And really, it looks like to be one of the success stories in the city, where the Seattle Promise Program, if you're a graduate from any of the Seattle public schools, you can go to any of the Seattle colleges for free.
It's a great program.
Yeah, and then they just keep adding layers and layers onto that program. So I can see why they want to put more investment there. It's been great uptick, and yeah.
And one of the things the city budget office was telling me was that with this $160 million of ARPA funding, there's really two big new buckets of money that the city has going into this budget. One is this $116 million for ARPA funding, and the other is the payroll tax, right? Because payroll tax, the collections from 2021 were supposed to help pay for a lot of the COVID response. And this is the first year that the mayor and city council really get to make some choices about how to spend a lot of money. What the budget office told me is there's a lot of overlap between the things they could spend the ARPA funding on, which had a bunch of restrictions from federal government, kind of as you were speaking to, and things they could spend the payroll tax on, where the city council wrote its own rules about what it could be spent on, so the mayor couldn't take that money and go spend it on whatever she wanted. But with a lot of overlap, remember in budget school, we were talking about how you want to spend the restricted funding first and kind of work your way to the less restrictive funding. That way you always sort of maximize the amount of flexibility you have on how you want to spend the money. Well, for the budget office and for the mayor, what they were telling me was that the ARPA funding was most restrictive in a lot of ways. So they spent that first on the things that overlap with payroll tax priorities. And now what they'd really like is for the city council to give them a little more flexibility on how they spend the payroll tax fund. So they've included in their budget package a bill that would change the city council's rules on spending payroll tax funds to give them a little bit more flexibility. And we'll see what the city council says on that, right? At the end of the day, it sounds like, if the mayor's office is right, the priorities that they wanted funding in the payroll tax are getting funded, just some of them with another source. So they'll get together. I'm sure there'll be lots of discussions about that, and we'll see what ends up getting funded in the end.
Got a few more things here. What is environmental justice and Green New Deal?
Yeah. One of the things that, of course, has been hanging out there for a couple of years is that the city council passed a Green New Deal resolution, and they set up a Green New Deal advisory board or oversight board to provide recommendations on what investments the city should be making. So the mayor has put $6.5 million specifically to fund things that the Green New Deal Oversight Board recommends, so to fund their recommendations. Also another about $12.7 million to fund investments in the Duwamish Valley and in the neighborhoods right around there. So trying to push some money out towards environmental justice and environmental concerns through there.
All right. And delivering on city services.
Yeah, so that's going to be a mix of things. They're sustaining things like Seattle Public Utilities budget, and we talked already about putting more money into the Clean Cities Initiative. One of the things that the mayor is trying to do, the budget office told me, is there were some places where they cut money over the last couple of years as we went through the COVID recession, and they're trying to put all that money back now. So They've got some money going back into parks now. They've got some money going back into public libraries. So I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's $6.5 million going back into parks and $5 million going back into public libraries to try to get them back into where they were in 2019.
And we got a question in here.
Mm-hmm.
You've already hit Darnell Hibbler. He's like, what investment is she making in the Black community? And I guess some of that, if you could easily identify maybe, but then some of it, because I know Office of Housing, a lot of times, where they've put investment into Black-led housing, and that might not necessarily right now, when you talk about the increase in housing, we don't know exactly where it's going yet, but some, Fame got money, Mount Zion got money, Africatown got money. It's
Mhm.
quite a few different, as far as housing goes. But if you could circle back around
Yeah.
into an investment in this budget, kind of targeting, I know they can't say Black, but targeting this BIPOC community.
Well, I think what the mayor would say, and this is not me agreeing or disagreeing with it. I think what the mayor would say is that putting all the money, up to $57 million this year in the participatory budgeting is a way to say that she supports investments in the Black community and letting the community decide what the right investments are, rather than the mayor's office deciding what they are, right? Similarly with the Equitable Communities Initiative, letting that advisory board, that task force that she convened, that created a set of recommendations, decide, leading with the community again, what the right investment should be in the Black community, rather than having, faceless bureaucrats over in City Hall making those decisions. So, $57 million is a lot of money that can go out the door on that, plus another 30 for the ECI.
Yeah, just got to get up. So basically, then what you're saying is $60 million this year.
$60 million for participatory budgeting.
Well,
another $30 million for ECI.
So, but 30 went to ECI, and then 30 went back into the participatory budgeting pot. So we're at 60 million, 30 and 30.
But for participatory budgeting, they've got the 27 million. 27 million they're carrying out for this year.
Talking about new money, Kev. So what I'm saying is like 30 went to ECI and then 30 into the participatory pot. So that's 60 million.
I get you. But at the same time, there's so many cases where the city budgets money for something, gets to the end of the year, it doesn't get spent, and then money just goes away.
Right.
Or it gets recycled to something else.
Yeah, it was like the cell phones, no rollover minutes.
So they don't get a ton of credit for keeping there, but they should at least get a little bit of credit for saying, no, we're not going to recycle that to something else. We're going to leave it in there and then sustain that
participatory budgeting pot just grew really big.
Really big. Not participatory. And again, only 30 million is going to be sustained past 2022, right? So they don't want to go fund $57 million worth of projects this year, and then only be able to sustain half of them, unless they're explicit about this. Unless they say we could spend $27 million and buy a bunch of land, right? That can be used for affordable housing, right? They could do in the communities, in South Seattle and in areas of South Seattle where displacement is hitting really hard. Right? Let's go buy up some land now. And maybe we can't necessarily build on it right away, but they can bank that for future years.
So all of this budget, this is basically the mayor's wish list, and then it goes over there to the council.
Yep.
And they do their remix. And that's what we saw even last time with the budget, where it was 100 million, and then the council's like, nah, we're going to put this here, that there, provisos, this and that. When you look at this whole budget, which is very big, and I know it's very long, but just in general, where do you think some places that the city council is going to exert themselves, and really we'll see some shakeups around this budget?
So one place I did notice the budget got cut was in the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And I asked the budget office about that, and it got cut because there was a bunch of one-time money that was in their budget to provide COVID relief funding for immigrants that didn't qualify for the federal funding. Okay. And so that one-time funding went away. My guess is, leading with Council President Gonzalez, that money is going to get put back in one form or another, right? Gonzalez has been a very strong advocate for immigrant rights and immigrant welfare in the city, and I would be shocked if she didn't try to add more money into that budget this year. And that's not to say that it was wrong for that one-off money to go away, and that's what happens with one-off funding. But there's certainly a good case that the immigrant communities in our city, particularly undocumented immigrants, still have needs. I mean, COVID is still with us, right? So there's a good case to be made that should continue on. I think that's one place. We talked about, there is more money in the Office of Economic Development for small business programs. I could see them putting more into that. That's something that Councilmember Morales has been a really, really strong advocate for. We really haven't dived into the transportation budget yet. I have to go spend a lot more time. That's $700 million, something like that. That is,
Really?
it
Transportation.
is $718 million proposed for next year, right? And so we're going to have to see, and a big chunk of that is, of course, fixing the West Seattle Bridge, which is supposed to open up again next summer, right? So, hopefully that'll go on time. They won't have to spend all the contingency on that.
Let me ask you this, just as the way the process works. I know we had a show, Budget School process. There also could be that the council agrees. So I think, what'd you say for housing? 100, it was 100. How much was the increase?
114.
So $114 million increase with housing to the Department Office of Housing. City council might say, okay, we agree with this, but we want it spent. We agree with the dollar amount.
Yeah.
I mean, do those kind of things occur? Where it's like, okay, we agree on the money,
right,
but we just want it configured a different way.
Yeah, and I wrote an article about a month ago looking at the housing numbers that just came out of the census, and we built a lot of housing over the last 10 years. In fact, it almost kept up with the population increase, but it was not even through the city, right? It was really concentrated in the center, and South Seattle and North Seattle just did not keep up. So I could see, for example, particularly some of our district-based members of the city council pushing hard for, specific geographic allocations of that housing money to try to get more of it in South Seattle and more of it in North Seattle, right? I could see that happening, right? Now, of course, the other really big conversation they're going to have, and I think we're going to have every year for many years, is SPD's budget, right? They're going to have to decide, are they comfortable with basically a status quo budget?
There's only one that I really hear, council member that I really hear real vocal about. That was that Lewis, who's out there. Councilmember Lewis, about budget. They need more money. They need more officers. They need, he's been real vocal. Is it Lewis?
Peterson. I think it's Peterson. I think
Sorry.
Peterson's one.
But I mean, so it isn't like you really hear a lot of council members really saying that, like, yo,
Right.
The SPD needs more money. We need more officers. We need more. It's like one council member out there by himself that's kind of beating that drum.
Herbold has been trying to thread the needle a little bit, because she does understand, and she chairs the committee for the council that oversees public safety and SPD.
Mm.
And so she understands, she gets a lot of feedback from residents about 911 response times and public safety and crime in neighborhoods. And she's trying to run, sort of be responsive to both sides of this, right? And, long term, they'd like, the question isn't whether to spin up alternatives, in the community, civilian-based and community-based alternatives to public safety and to work further upstream. I think everybody's on board with that happening. The question is, how quickly do you downsize SPD while you're still in the process of building those out, right? But the hard part for this is, we said a net increase of 35 officers next year. And the problem with trying to go faster with that, even if you did believe that, hey, we should try to address the high attrition and get back to where we were maybe a couple of years ago, or even just a year ago. The problem with that is the pipeline for hiring for SPD is so long that they already know right now how many officers they're going to hire next year, modulo a small number of lateral hires from other law enforcement departments that they could potentially get on board faster. But anybody that needs to go through the Washington State Police Academy and go through specific SPD training before they can go out there and serve on the line, they've accounted for all those folks already. So they know the maximum number of people they're going to be hiring next year already. Again, within a small number based on lateral hires. One of the interesting things that will be controversial in here is they told me that they've got a little bit of money in the budget. Let's see, how much is it here? They put in just a little bit of money for incentive programs for hiring new officers and for hiring what they call lateral hires, which are from other departments. And I think it was, not finding them, but I think it was just over $1 million that they put in for that. And that's something that Councilmember Peterson, about a month ago, tried to get reinstated in their budget for this year and was voted down.
Oh, was that on the debate
was,
over the 15?
Yeah, they
15
were
million,
they were voted. He was voted down quite resoundingly on that. So I think they're going to have a debate about whether there should be financial incentives for hiring and for lateral hires in SPD.
Yeah, and there's another authority though when it comes to SPD. Wouldn't that be Judge Robart? And they keep getting warnings here saying like, you're gonna have to do something about your staffing. And it's a little hypothetical. Could you see like the monitor getting involved if say they're like they want to cut the budget even more, and then the monitor comes in?
If they try to cut the budget even more, the monitor could certainly come in. One of the things that's hard for the monitor and for Judge Robart to do is they can't really tell the police department and the city what to do. They can just tell them after the fact whether what they did is legal or not. It's very strange and very tricky.
Right.
So Robart, judges don't do what's called advisory opinions. You can't say, so if we were to do this thing, would that be legal? They don't do that, right? You have to do something first. They will only rule on what's called a live controversy, something that's actually happening right now, and as an issue for somebody right now, right? So the city council and the mayor and SPD can't find out ahead of time what Robart is going to think about something they might propose to do. They just have to do it and see how it reacts.
Do you think that that SPD budget that's going to be a big point of contention, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, let's be clear, right? We have some very vocal advocacy groups in the city,
right?
Many of whom have the ear of city council members and the mayor's office, who are going to continue to speak out loudly about it, right? And that's good. That's community participation. That's what we should be having, right? And I think we've already seen very clearly that the city council is going to be listening to them. How much of that they decide they can actually do is yet to be seen. There will be voices out there across the spectrum. There'll be voices out there to continue to fund SPD down to 50% of where they were 2 years ago. There are going to be voices saying, hey, we need to staff back up SPD. And there are going to be folks in the middle saying, let's find a good glide path here. More aggressively grow civilian and community-based community safety programs while we start to ramp down SPD.
So let me ask you this then: how much investment is slated for, this ramp up in the civilian-led response?
So there's some stuff that's going out the door right now. They just announced this first set of awards for the $10 million for capacity building for community safety. The mayor said that she has put another $10 million into the budget for next year to continue those investments. I don't remember if they are sustained beyond 2022. But I'm pretty sure there's another $10 million for next year to sustain those.
I'm just curious either way on this issue if that's enough investment.
Well, and again, we've talked
because
about
if it's a state of
budgeting and equitable communities initiative. We have hard choices because there's lots of ways we can spend that money, right?
Well, I mean, I hear you, right? And all I'm saying is, no matter what side of this issue you might be on, that if the goal now, if Seattle is committing to ramping up this response and everything else, it almost seems like the approach to that we've seen when we want to ramp up and get something done, all the way on a local level to, pushing out a vaccine. And it seemed like if this reimagination of public safety and everything else is really where we at, then, it seems like then we should also put the dollar values there to be able to really push this thing at a high level. It's almost like we want basically corporate results, but we're pushing it at a grassroots level. It's almost, this should be a boot camp or something.
And there's also the Seattle process issue, right? I mean, communities want to be able to, dictate how these things should work, right? If you want it to go faster, you can make it go faster if you turn control over to the mayor's office, right? But and they will definitely make it. They will make it go faster. It may not be what community wants, but they'll make it go faster, right? And if you want to do the Seattle process and do the community involvement, make sure that everybody gets heard it takes longer to do that. Right?
No,
And
and
we're
I-
not good as a city at finding the right
I
balance.
think it's important that the community is definitely involved in this process, but it's just like we've seen what happens when we collectively as a city determine that something is important for us.
Mhm.
Is what I'm saying. Is like guys, things can really, really like be moving here, and I know that they're part of it is exploratory, looking at what solutions might work in our city or what might not. But it's almost like a whole nother train of thought is like, man, if we want to get there, let's really put some money into like this training center. Let's develop, or you know what I'm saying? Let's construct a training center. Let's get this going. Let's get that going and everything else. If we want to get there fast when we're talking about ramping up, because it's public safety.
Yeah. This is super important, something we all feel.
Yeah.
But again, it's a question of, whose voices do we hear and how much Seattle process do we do to get there? It's a challenge.
Yeah. All right. So before we get out of here, Kevin, what are your big takeaways from this budget, and then you can explain to everybody what the next steps are.
Yeah. So my big takeaways from this are it really seems like the mayor has bought into the sort of progressive principle that the solution to homelessness is housing. And she's making a big investment in that. That they are also moving really forward on turning over a lot of responsibility to the Regional Homeless Authority. And we can, cross our fingers and hope that goes well. That's going to be, a big deal. There's going to be a lot of discussion about the right way to spend the ARPA funding, a lot of discussion on the right way to spend the payroll tax funding. There's going to be hard discussions around SPD. And I think that's the stuff that we're going to hear the city council wrestle with over the next 2 months. So later this week, Wednesday through Friday, the city council is going to hear a set of presentations, kind of deep dives over different parts of SPD's, the mayor's budget proposal. And I know we've got a slide with the schedule for Wednesday through Friday. Wednesday starts out a lot of his overview, kind of quick overview of
We don't know that one.
no, it's fine.
Oh, that's
All right,
nice.
well, I can just find it real quick.
Here
we go. All right, we got the details here. So Wednesday morning, the city council is going to be holding sessions that you can watch live on the Seattle channel. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9:30 to 1, and then 2 to 5. So you get an hour in there to have some lunch. Wednesday morning, they're doing just budget process overview and a high-level overview of the mayor's budget. Afternoon, they're doing Office of Economic Development, Sustainability and Environment, and Education and Early Learning. Thursday in the morning, they're going to do Office of Housing, Human Services, and the citywide homeless response. In the afternoon, they're going to do community safety and community-led investment. So they're going to have a whole presentation just on some of the stuff that we were talking about just now, as well as the police department. So Thursday afternoon is going to be public safety time. Friday morning, they're going to do SDOT, Department of Transportation, and Parks Department. And then in the afternoon, they're going to talk about COVID response, which is really kind of a multi-department coordinated response across the city. So that's the presentations that they're going to hear. Next week, it's going to be a quiet week. They're not going to have any budget meetings themselves, but the city council members and their staff are going to be pulling together lists of what all their issues are, kind of a bunch of things that we've been talking about, so they can then have a set of meetings and another sort of couple days of presentations, just reviewing collectively, here's what we all thought were the issues with SDOT. Here's what we all thought were the issues with homelessness, and see where there's overlap and who should work together on writing some amendments. So that's what we're going to see over the next 2 weeks.
All right. I think that, people have been hitting me up like, man, why is Converge talk about so much about the budget? And
it's only $6.5 billion.
Yeah, $6.6 billion. But the other thing is that how people spend their money even the city municipality around their values. What you believe in is what you put money into. Mm-hmm. And maybe what you don't believe in is what you take money away from. And I'm always trying to have conversations at the highest level, right? And at the highest level here, a lot of what makes this city move, Well, definitely the money makes it move, but decisions we make and everything else is tied to, man, what are we funding? What are we supporting here? Does what we fund represent the values of our city? And we're a city, it's a rapidly growing city, so it's a city with rapidly changing values for sure. But, this is why it's important to invest this time and energy to understand how our city is spending money. Because, a lot of times people is after the fact, oh man, they spent this on that. Why would they do this? And it's like, man, y'all got to get involved. At least understand.
Yeah.
Definitely, we're not all going to agree 100%. But people need to understand.
And it's not, and it's what we decide to fund, but it's equally what we decide not to fund, right? Those are statements that are priorities as well, right? And that could be assertive priorities, right? Deciding not to fund SPD is an assertive priority of specific goals about how we feel about public safety. We have chronically underfunded bridge and other transportation infrastructure, right? And just ongoing maintenance.
All that deferred maintenance.
All that deferred maintenance, right? And one of the things I'll be looking in the budget is
where's that at?
Are they increasing that this year? Yeah. And that's a statement for us about and there are nuances within that, right? Because a lot of that is car infrastructure. And as a city, if we're trying to say, hey, look, we have too much car infrastructure, right? And we don't have enough public transit infrastructure. Are there really people who are saying like we shouldn't repair some of these bridges that are over 100 some odd years old, and we should continue to defer the maintenance until there's an emergency there? There are some people who want to tear down some of those bridges. I'm not saying they're the majority of the people, but there are those voices in our city as well, right? For ecological reasons, right? For quality of life and community reasons, right? We think about, think about what it did to Seattle when they put I-5 through the middle of it, right?
Well, what they did in my neighborhood when they put the I-90 lid right there.
Yeah, and they, tried to put another highway through the central area.
Yeah.
Thankfully, that got stopped. But, those kinds of decisions are really important, and they have large impact. And it's good to be thoughtful of them, and it starts with the budget. Like, if there's no money, it's definitely not going to happen, for better or for worse.
Yeah, man, that's real. I need to interview somebody. Send me some info for the people who want to tear down on bridges, because I'm well, you know me, man. I'm always just wanting to learn. So like, I really want to know like where they're coming from and where they see the future of transportation and movement of people around the city. Yeah, it'll be interesting. All right, Kevin. Appreciate you taking the time. We've gone through this here, and we're just getting warmed up because, as you know, this budget it takes a while, and so we'll be checking in with everybody. But we're gonna follow the money all the way through. Kevin went over the schedule. We'll also put it up on our website, and you can follow along everything that Kevin Schofield is doing at sccinsight.com. Sco Money. Thank you for your time, Chief.
Me that. Thank you, sir.
We'll catch you next time. Peace.